Simon, you alluded to this earlier around the forecasts, and I mean, I've just found them to be such an important piece of the marketing process, an important piece of information to provide to prospective buyers so they can bring us, a reasonable and compelling offer. Can we talk about the financial model and financial forecast? What does it typically include? Who prepares it? Overall, what is the purpose?
We would tend to certainly help in terms of the review of that. It depends really if we're going to a financial buyer, where the model would need to stand up to much greater scrutiny because it tends to be then the funding model, the deal model that everyone comes back to. So we want to make sure it's robust. We want to make sure that it's planted on reality in terms of the assumptions based on historic, and that people can follow it through. So it tends not just to be a number lumped in for sales in each month going forward. It tends to be driven by previous stats and things like that. But often, if we're selling either just to trade, for trade strategic, we would look at probably just putting in the current year that we're in. When we go out to market, we'd have a forecast for that year, and then we'd put forward a budget for the following year. We don't tend to go beyond that. The only exception is the kind of where you've got a hockey stick. You may want to show a trade the following year's numbers to show the trajectory of growth that you're on, to try and get some value for them to value it on a growth basis. But that's really the big differences. If you're selling to trade and PE, we quite often, or financial buyers, would quite often have a different information memorandum or even an appendix that says, here's our ongoing business strategy, and that's in volume 2, so that the trade buyer still only gets the one further year of financial numbers. And the reason behind that is a trade buyer will have different plans for the business, and we don't want their ambition to be limited by management's perspective of it as a standalone business. We want them to be looking at it. We want to make sure we include aspects within the information memorandum where they think, wow, we can add value here, we can add value there, we can grow this quicker. And we want them to then build their own set of numbers that way surpass ours, so they're willing to pay a higher price for it.
That's very interesting. Bill, do you can you just talk about your firm's process on building the financial model?
Yes, Simon makes some great points. I was delighted to hear him use hockey stick, because I was going to say the same thing, and I was trying to think of something that might work in the UK, and I was rounders or cricket. So, but that is something that we look at as well, and I'm sure Michael and Simon have seen this, where you get projections or a business owner is very optimistic, and they say, well, we're moving along here. We've been pretty flat for a number of years, but the second the buyer comes in, they're going to see this massive increase in sales, the hockey stick. And so that's something that we always caution on. Totally agree with what my friends have said. We want to make sure that we hit the goals. We do ourselves absolutely no good to put together big numbers, big sales and profit numbers, and then fall short of those. What we work on, what we're spend a lot of time with, and I suspect Michael and Simon's firms do the same thing, is the assumptions, the underlying assumptions that are building up the sales, all the other expense. We look at the balance sheet, and this is a key thing, and this is something I think a lot of business owners skip over, the use of the cash flow statement, because I ask business owners for their financials, balance sheet and income statement. They rarely send a cash flow. And we want to look at that, and we want to understand the changes in the balance sheet. And that's why that cash flow is very important. We're working with, we're trying to buy a company, and we're trying to work with the sellers who did not put together cash flow. And we're showing that as you grow the business, you'll have a use of cash far beyond the profits of the business. So we get judged by our assumptions. We put a lot of work into it, and it is a very important part of our process.
Yeah, Michael, you alluded to this as well, that you don't want to put out a forecast because this process takes so long that, as the months go by, if you're missing forecasts, it's definitely a risk for the transaction. Can you comment around just, financial models, financial forecasts, and how you incorporate those into your process?
I think the guys covered it pretty well. I mean, I think the only thing that I would just highlight is certain clients have no visibility beyond 30 or 60 days. And so when you put together month-to-month financials, you just, recognize that they're not going to be accurate. If you look at it over a year, they're going to be very accurate. And so I think you just need to, we make a big distinction when we have visibility versus when we don't have visibility. And the only thing that I think wasn't mentioned that probably would be additive is, are there some huge capital expenditures or things that are, the roof needs to be, replaced that isn't in your typical P&L, or if you want to just straight line your balance sheet or things like that. And so those are the things that could really wreak havoc at the end of a transaction when someone says, wait a minute, there's some maintenance that's going to now hit us this year. And so that would be another factor. But so those would be the two things that I would mention.
Yeah, great points. And I think maybe the other thing I would add and get your guys' comments on it, but just the forecasting of a balance sheet as well, how important it is to really understand as a closing of a transaction, what does a buyer actually get from working capital assets,